Today, we will continue our in-depth and comprehensive study of the profound and influential philosophical teachings found within Confucius's timeless and revered work, the Analects. In the Analects, we are currently discussing the chapter Wei Zheng on government. Why do we extensively study Confucius's profound Analects? In fact, within the Analects of Confucius, there is absolutely no teaching that provides any hidden key instructions for attaining the omniscient fruition of final liberation, nor does it particularly discuss any truly profound and subtle philosophical views or intricate concepts, like those of Madhyamaka or Prajna, for example. It does not contain in Mahayana Buddhism's entering the Bodhisattva path the vast, truly altruistic actions described there. Although such specific instructions are not to be found there, after all, it still represents the wisdom of the ancients, and that wisdom remains abundant, valuable, and deeply meaningful even within the context of our 21st century world. It can still be applied and made use of, so in studying it we are certainly not at any disadvantage. Moreover, it comes from more than 2,000 years ago, outside the Buddhist tradition we rely upon. So, what exactly were the other worldly cultures truly like? Especially in the Han region, which today, in the whole world at this very moment, is a nation with a very large population. Within their traditional thought, what kind of profound philosophy do they truly have? Including many Han people today, even they themselves are not particularly clear about it, and this remains a significant point of contemplation. Because back in the 1970s and 80s of the last century, what people once referred to as the Confucian and Mencian way of thought had already been largely lost. And in this situation, many of us nowadays find ourselves completely unable to genuinely grasp, appreciate, or fully understand such profound ideas. So this is also quite a significant and regrettable pity. Therefore, when we carefully and thoroughly study this important treatise, the main focus is on being a person. And what kind of person to be. This is very important. In fact, when it comes to being a person, some of the ideas of people in ancient times were more or less the same, including the teachings we often study from Mipham Rinpoche, Sakya Pandita, and Nagarjuna Bodhisattva. Their maxims and their instructions on how to conduct oneself have quite some similarities with what is indeed mentioned here. There are also points in common. These principles may be, whether for those of us who spread the Dharma and benefit sentient beings, or for those who practice alone, it is also of crucial importance, and therefore, during the process of our study, we should always examine whether we have gained any insight, or whether we have discovered anything that feels meaningful to ourselves. In certain aspects, we have truly benefited in some way. Because nowadays, in this world, many people either blend themselves completely into society, having no independent views of their own, and simply becoming indistinguishable from the crowd, or else they go to the opposite extreme and insist on walking their own solitary path in isolation. There are quite a lot of cases where people are unable to interact with others and end up feeling out of place in society, while those in the first category tend to mix indiscriminately with just about anyone around them. Of course, if you go along with others, the Buddha also said that this is very good. But if you completely merge with them, however, such individuals are easily influenced or contaminated by worldly affairs. They're often referred to as social butterflies, because when it comes to interpersonal interactions, they tend to be extremely skilled, confident, and outgoing in every situation. This is also a kind of condition. On the other hand, as mentioned earlier, there is social anxiety. As for those with social anxiety, they're often afraid of interacting with others, extremely uncomfortable in social situations, and tend to experience a persistent sense of fear when it comes to communication. They don't want to interact with anyone. For those who are truly accomplished in spiritual practice, this is not a problem. They still don't see anyone at all. They practice alone in the mountains and valleys. This is our role model. It's very good. But that's not always the case. Nowadays, among many young people, there are even those who don't want to see their own parents. There are actually quite a lot of people like this. So whether it's socializing or practicing on your own, when interacting with your family, relatives, and friends, there should be a sense of measure. Knowing how to maintain this measure is the behavior of a wise person. And if you don't understand this sense of measure, there are still certain standards of judgment in society. If you go too far, others will also disapprove of your actions, and many things in your own life won't go smoothly either. If you haven't yet reached this boundary, then others will still disapprove and you yourself will be miserable. So we should always, regarding the teachings and maxims of the great virtuous ones and wise elders, these teachings and sayings, use them to measure ourselves, so that whatever actions we undertake, we won't go overboard or become overly excessive, and whatever words we articulate won't be over the top or excessively flamboyant either. Basically, in the eyes of others, it will seem very appropriate, and if we conduct ourselves in this manner, it will also be quite reasonable. It will make us adaptable to everyone. So this is extremely important. Therefore, some of us who have an altruistic mindset, whose practice is very good and whose study and contemplation are also excellent, but because their social skills are significantly lacking, in the very end, their diligent work in spreading the Dharma and truly benefiting all sentient beings basically has absolutely no hope. Some people, although their wisdom and such may not be particularly high, but they have a very good understanding of how the world truly works. They have certain causes, conditions, and abilities to spread the Dharma and benefit all beings. This is also extremely important and significant. So, when we carefully consider Confucius's profound teachings, at least within the scope of the classes we have thoroughly discussed and explored so far, it genuinely appears that these teachings do not fundamentally conflict with your usual and established way of thinking. Even though these are very ancient and venerable treatises, some of our fundamental cultural concepts. Could there be any contradictions? It seems that for now there aren't any. Moreover, if we dig deeper into each sentence, there seems to be something truly worthy of our careful consideration, worth our reference. There is some truth to that as well. So, today we will continue. Confucius said, "If a person has no trustworthiness, I do not know what can be made of him. A large cart without its linchpin, a small cart without its yoke bar, how can they go anywhere?" Here, Confucius was speaking to certain individuals, saying that as a human being, one must possess credibility, trustworthiness, and integrity. If a person lacks this fundamental quality of honesty and cannot be relied upon, then, as he said, I don't know what use they are. You truly don't know what this person is good for at all. When we look for someone, or if we want to rely on someone, you must find a good person, find someone truly reliable. Just like we often say, how exactly do we put it, you know? If someone is trustworthy and sincere, I always feel that in our Tibetan language, some meanings seem hard to express. About this trustworthy and sincere, there are still people among us. If I combine Chinese and Tibetan, it's a little bit embarrassing, really. People truly need to have someone in their lives whom they can absolutely and completely trust. It seems that in Chinese and also in our Tibetan language, people who are truly very trustworthy and honest individuals, if a person truly doesn't have this kind of essential support in their life, or simply doesn't possess this kind of fundamental integrity at all, then it really seems like this particular person isn't really useful. No matter what kind of responsibility you give to this kind of person, nothing seems to work. They're simply unreliable. Didn't we already talk about this earlier? When it comes to selecting the right people, Confucius emphasized that we must look at what a person aims to do, understand how they go about it, and observe the deeper causes and intentions behind their actions. Examine what brings them peace. Can a person really hide? Can a person really hide? It means take a comprehensive look at this person's past experiences, how they are currently living, and what their overall mindset is truly like. Can they really hide it? When we look for someone, for example, if I look for a volunteer today, I just have to ask, what kind of a person is this individual truly? Everyone answers in unison. This person is great. This person has no problems. Because of their past behaviors and actions, their current state, all aspects, their conduct, people will immediately speak up about it. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. This is quite hard to translate from the original Tibetan, isn't it? Whether a person is truly good or not, everyone will certainly express their opinions and say it out. It is definitely not for me to make that judgment or statement. Everyone around each and every person should be very clear and fully aware about it. So if a person is truly trustworthy, everyone will really choose them. If a person is not trustworthy at all, then everyone will say, this person definitely isn't good. There really is a big difference between people. But many people don't realize this. They think they're pretty good themselves and that everyone treats them well. But in this regard, the differences are actually quite significant. And the main reason for this is, if a person is trustworthy, what truly matters is that the person has reached a certain level of maturity. When he makes a commitment, he genuinely follows through and takes responsibility. As we often say, it's about being someone who sincerely lives with honesty. Generally speaking, wise and prudent people typically won't make too many promises at all. Once a promise is truly made, it's like it's permanently carved in solid stone. It will never change, even in death. This is what Nagarjuna Bodhisattva actually said, right? Generally speaking, when a person naturally speaks with true and deep conviction, no matter what dangers they may encounter, they still absolutely won't change. In that particular case, you could truly say they are indeed trustworthy. But if a person doesn't have this kind of reliability and integrity, here, two analogies are given. One is a rather large cart without a crucial linchpin, and the other is a relatively small cart without a proper yoke. Some texts say, in ancient times, large carts were typically pulled by oxen, while smaller ones were drawn by horses, very different from modern vehicles. These traditional carts had a distinct connection structure linking the carriage to the animals that pulled them. The large one is called ni, linchpin, which is basically like a nail or a pin. And for the small cart, there is also something called yue, yoke pin. This is what connects the horse cart to the horse, and it functions much like a nail. There is a point where they connect. But if that connecting piece is missing, how could the cart possibly move forward? Could it really follow behind the horse on its own? Of course not. It's simply impossible, and that's exactly what this analogy is meant to illustrate. Let me show you all a picture. This is from truly ancient times, probably dating back to the historical era of Confucius. And this one has been recently unearthed in modern times. This is precisely what was just referred to as the yue, yoke pin, a significant and important component, which is at the back of the small horse cart. It's the shaft that connects the cart to the horse. It's made in the shape of an animal like this, and it's made of brass. Some archaeologists nowadays believe that this ancient artifact was unearthed from over 2,000 years ago. This particular piece is also very exquisite and remarkably well preserved. What we just talked about was the ni, crossbar end. The ni is specifically for large carts. This particular one is also from a relatively early period. It was something rather like a bronze plate, and examples of it were unearthed around the period of the Western Han dynasty. But in the case of an actual horse-drawn carriage, the essential part was the connection that firmly joined the horse to the body of the cart itself. There's another interesting picture here. Look closely. This particular one that we just saw now is quite remarkable. When the carriage and the horse are joined together, there's this piece. If this particular piece is indeed missing, then it probably cannot be easily pulled out. There's another one, just now on this part. There was a circular piece known as the yue, which in the days of ancient horse-drawn carriages served as the crucial joint. This joint essentially functioned like a wooden peg that firmly connected the cart to the animal pulling it, used to fasten them together. Sometimes it even looked a bit like an animal's head. If this piece is missing, then the carriage simply cannot function properly. In precisely the same way, if a person truly lacks trustworthiness and integrity, if there's nothing reliable about them, then the entire carriage of one's life will be impacted, can't be driven, and can't be controlled. So sometimes the profound metaphors that were used by the ancients are really quite interesting and profoundly captivating. For a person to live a truly meaningful and impactful life in this complex and ever-evolving world, integrity is absolutely fundamental and undeniably crucial. Isn't this what the Jianyu Sutra talks about? In our personal lives, the concept of integrity is actually profoundly important. If there is no integrity whatsoever, then absolutely nothing can truly function or operate effectively. Whether it's in the secular world or beyond it, none of these foundations exist without it. It's an invisible kind of thing. Some scholars in the past have also said that this so-called integrity is truly an invisible and powerful force. This very same so-called integrity is indeed an invaluable and intangible asset. It is an invisible form of wealth and an unseen source of strength, and therefore within the entire human world this must be regarded as something fundamental and essential, forming the very foundation upon which everything else depends. As for ourselves, sometimes we wonder what kind of person we truly are. Actually, people should, everyone in fact, thinks of themselves as a good person. But whether or not we can truly keep our word, if we can't even keep our word, and always pretend to be exceptionally clever and intellectually superior in every situation and location, just like what the esteemed and highly revered Mipham Rinpoche wisely stated, there are indeed some individuals who consistently act in a clever and self-important manner like this. On the surface, they may seem very capable and truly wise, but in reality, this is a clear sign of utter shamelessness and a complete lack of remorse. It's really quite terrible. On the surface, we seem to possess a kind of wisdom, but if a person does not possess any stable character or a firm and steady heart, then it becomes impossible for him to accomplish anything at all. This is especially true in everyday life, where we so often emphasize this very point in our discussions. People who are especially trustworthy and reliable are highly praised and respected in social circles and are very popular with everyone. But if a person's heart and character are particularly bad, many people will definitely even put you on their blacklist, and consequently won't interact with you at all. You won't even have any basic friends to speak of, nor will you have anyone who fundamentally and truly trusts you. So, whether in ancient times or in the present day, it is clear that one should learn to carefully observe the state of one's own mind. His Holiness, the Precious Master, also often gave us many teachings about how to conduct ourselves as human beings. Back in those earlier days, when I was still very young, I heard such advice frequently. I didn't really think about it, wondering why His Holiness didn't teach deeper Dharma, including secret instructions from Vajrayana. He often spoke about his teachings on character. It seemed really quite superficial, something like that, indeed. I myself had such thoughts, but looking back, it seems that in your own continuum, you have attained higher states. If you ultimately fail as a person or in your actions, many of your merits, no matter how impressive or numerous, are like buildings constructed on a foundation of ice. They are inherently unstable and cannot truly realize their full potential or enduring value. Therefore, as the wise ancients profoundly said, whether it is a person's inherent character, their overall admirable qualities, or their unwavering honesty and profound trustworthiness, these fundamental attributes were all highly valued and deeply respected. Now, in the modern world, whether it's, for example, borrowing money or dealing with any kind of personal relationship or professional relationship, if a person is truly good, then all of the collective strength indeed will also be focused on you. But if a person is not good, it's very difficult, and many things become extremely hard to achieve. That is why Confucius placed such great emphasis on the art of being a proper human being. If one fails in this most basic aspect, then all virtues and every opportunity that might otherwise come his way will, for him, remain essentially impossible to realize or bring into existence. This is truly the thinking of the ancients indeed. You can all reflect on this as well. And then, moving on, Wei Zheng asked, is it possible to know things 10 generations ahead? Confucius said, the Yin dynasty followed the rituals of the Xia dynasty, so the changes and continuities can be known. Next, the main focus is on Confucius's way of anticipating what lies ahead, his thought concerning the future and the unknown. Within this section, there appears a disciple named Wei Zheng, and it is recorded that he raised a thoughtful question. It doesn't specify exactly what kind of person he was. I also haven't had the chance to look it up. There should be information on him. Each of Confucius's disciples had different personalities and different goals. This person might have loved studying history. He might also have often pondered the evolving situations of various future dynasties, including their systems of ritual and etiquette, and the overall rise and fall of the nation. He wondered what these things would be like. He probably placed a lot of importance on these matters. So, when it came to Confucius, he wanted to observe and see. Since you now indeed know astronomy above and geography below, and also the world, and you seem to be knowledgeable about everything. But do you truly know about the future or not? Can you accurately divine it or perhaps tell fortunes? Or do you have some other supernatural abilities to show? Or is it something else? Because this question was asked more than 2,500 years ago. What were Confucius's predictions and judgments about the future really like? What exactly were they? We can also take a closer look. So what did he say? He said, 10 generations can be known. Do you truly know what exactly will happen in the next 10 generations? What precisely will the future truly be like? Here, when they say 1 generation in ancient times, they were referring to a significant period of time. It was calculated as 30 years by today's standards. So if 1 generation is 30 years, then 10 generations, in fact, each generation is 30 years. So if you calculate it as 30 years per generation, that's 300 years. At that time, someone asked Confucius, if you know, what exactly will things be like 300 years in the distant future? What precisely will the state of our human society be then? He posed this kind of profound question to Confucius. At that time, Confucius explained it from several aspects. The first aspect was the Yin dynasty followed the rituals of the Xia dynasty, so the changes and continuities can be understood. We can also use the current understanding of the ancient Xia, Zhou, and Shang dynasties of China. As we discussed earlier, generally speaking, these were historically Han Chinese territories. In the very beginning, the true kings. During the times of Yao, Shan, and Yu, there were no actual kings. At that time, they were regarded as sons of heaven, including the heir of lords, the heir of the son of heaven, and so on. There were such periods, so in this case, from the Xia, Shang, Zhou, Qin, 3 kingdoms, the 2 Jin dynasties, and the northern and southern dynasties, if we look at it this way, the very first was the Xia dynasty, then the Shang, followed by the Shang and Zhou dynasties. Here the term Yin specifically refers to the ancient Shang dynasty, because of the continuation and inheritance of the Shang dynasty. What does inheritance mean here? It refers to the ancient Ya dynasty. It was indeed the very first one. It's quite similar to the 7 heavenly kings we often talk about in the Tibetan regions. The first one was the Xia dynasty. By carefully examining the various rituals and systems of the ancient Shang dynasty, we can trace or infer the significant continuation of these practices in this particular way. In fact, we can also understand the intricate losses and significant gains among them. These can be clearly known and thoroughly understood. As for the ancient Shang dynasty, here Yin precisely refers to the powerful Shang dynasty. The Shang dynasty was remarkably capable of continuing many of the established and traditional rituals of the preceding Xia dynasty. But among these there were some exceptions. Some of them were significantly reduced or completely abandoned. For example, some aspects that were unfavorable to their system, some were abandoned. There were also some changes made according to the needs of the era. Some notable additions and developments were indeed made in the new era. Aside from these specific new elements, basically the Xia and Shang dynasties did not have many significant differences in their fundamental characteristics. Therefore, we can confidently use the Shang dynasty to infer and understand the earlier period, all the rises and falls of the Xia dynasty. There would basically not be any major changes. This is the first section. Now, as for the second section, the Zhou dynasty followed the rituals of the Yin, Shang. The losses and gains can be known. The meaning of the second section is that after the Xia dynasty came the Shang dynasty, and after the Shang dynasty came the Zhou dynasty. So in the future, the Zhou dynasty, that is to say, would continue through the ritual system of the Shang dynasty. In fact, these aspects of the Zhou dynasty should also be able to be carried on. So among what is continued, the specific things that are reduced or conversely added can also be understood. This fundamental point represents a significant difference between the Shang and Zhou dynasties that was just previously mentioned and discussed. And then, moving forward, as for those who truly succeed the Zhou dynasty, even after a full 100 generations have passed, their legacy can still be clearly known and understood. So after that, if one continues the glorious Zhou dynasty, then in the next 100 generations, if we talk about the next 100 generations, and if we consider each generation as 30 years, that's basically about 3,000 years. So the era of those 3,000 years can also be known. From the Xia, Shang, Zhou, three kingdoms, and the two Jin, then to Tang, Song, Yuan, Ming, and Qing. Of course, within each of these there were many rulers. For example, in the Tang dynasty, many kings came to power. And the Song dynasty also had many, as did the Sui dynasty and the Qing dynasty and so on. In this way, basically, whether it's the culture of the nation or its political system or its rise and fall, by analogy, these things are basically known. Actually, on the surface, it seems that Confucius also answered these questions, but again, on the surface, some aspects were not explained clearly. But when you really observe closely, perhaps some cultural genes or certain aspects of the system, what Confucius meant was basically there might not be any major changes. By analogy, much like China's ancient Xia, Shang, and Zhou dynasties, we can observe similar patterns, all the way to the social systems of the Spring and Autumn and Warring States periods. Their various methods and diverse ways of management, it is quite possible that the next 300 years will be like this as well. Because of this, many people, including some esteemed historians, have come to acknowledge this phenomenon or think that Confucius was remarkable. Why was he so remarkable? Every place has its own relatively fixed and established system, and if it doesn't encounter any particular special circumstances, basically it will continue in a certain pattern and operate in a certain, often intricate and well-defined way. So now, looking at some of the extensive and significant history of the Han region, it becomes evident that some systems were indeed quite solid, remarkably enduring, and highly effective. Some people in our contemporary world often say that things were indeed so good under this particular leader and so very bad under that other leader, or that things were not good under this leader, while that leader might have been very good. But in reality, it's just the same old wine in a brand new bottle. How exactly should I put it then? Basically, there might not have been much significant change. This is primarily because of their ingrained way of thinking and their established patterns, including how some rulers exercise their authority and their distinctive style of holding power. Various forms of corruption also emerged in the process. When these things properly happen, how to effectively manage and punish them, the fundamental systems in the future will basically follow this same general style and overall pattern. Of course, as he himself said, it won't be exactly the same as before. Every dynasty and every era, there are always increases and decreases because the ruler's own personal circumstances and specific needs for these particular things will definitely lead to significant increases, while the areas that are not needed are also constantly changing and evolving. So when I look at our overall institute, after the nirvana of His Holiness, the overall situation in the future, as long as there are no special circumstances, basically, whether it's the various administrators, or even whether it's 2 years, 1 year, or 3 years, if there are no special circumstances, basically each individual person possesses their own unique and distinct way of governing themselves and their affairs, their own management style, and this administrator has a certain amount of power. No matter what those around him say, he may not necessarily listen. According to his own situation at the time, as long as the main principles remain unchanged when it comes to some minor details. For example, the previous person in charge might have thought something was necessary, but when the next person takes over, if he feels it's not needed, he'll immediately remove it. If he genuinely feels that something significant needs to be carefully added, whether it's an important item or a crucial point, he promptly adds it right away. So this particular way of doing things basically doesn't involve a lot of extensive or drastic changes. So this, in essence, is a kind of profound prediction about the eventual future of human civilization. As for this particular kind of prediction, many prominent historians and scholars in the world today widely believe that Confucius' profound ideas are still very relevant. when it comes to major nations, regardless of which civilization it is. For example, the Spanish civilization, or the ancient Egyptian civilization, or the rich Indian civilization, many diverse civilizations have lasted for hundreds or even thousands of years and have left a lasting legacy. And during such times, many of their policies and strategies, indeed, and some of their fundamental ideas, are certainly bound to change in the intricate details. For example, in the past, we used to make telephone calls on landlines, but now we primarily send digital messages. In the past, we communicated by letter. Now we use WeChat. In the past, we rode in horse-drawn carriages. Now we ride in cars. So, in terms of form, there have been changes. But when it comes to people's overall mindset, whether open or conservative, and many traditional ways and methods, within their fundamental ideological DNA, some essential things have remained completely unchanged. Some people even genuinely believe that nowadays, in the foreseeable future, many significant ideas from the Tibetan region might become rather unique, and that previous beliefs may change. But if there are no special circumstances, generally based on the local geography, the beliefs and experiences passed down from the older generation, including certain specific differences in personality and culture, can basically be carried on. This is something that is absolutely bound to happen, and it is inevitable. So, in our world, it seems like last year, in the Shurangama Sutra, if I remember correctly, there was a concept called the seeing essence is indestructible. Whether you see the Ganges River at the age of 3 or see the Ganges River at the age of 80, even though the water of the Ganges is constantly changing, with new water flowing through it, in reality, the overall state of the Ganges doesn't really change much. So sometimes, even when a person is replaced, and there might be something entirely new, many of the underlying causes and conditions, and much of the inherent continuity still remain. Basically won't change very much. This is a kind of thinking from Confucius. Of course, nowadays, when it truly comes to accurately predicting the future, perhaps people all over the world are paying very close attention to this as well. We also sincerely hope to truly observe, to clearly see what the future will ultimately become. There are many intense and significant cultural conflicts. Yesterday, I mentioned the concept of AI. Here, I'd like to share, although I feel embarrassed, but it's inconvenient to use someone else's portrait rights. So I used a lip sync model in different languages to create this demonstration. This is something you should also think about carefully. For example, what am I actually doing? But in fact, the underlying meaning behind this is to truly see what the future will ultimately become. Mainly, for example, if it's just me alone, then when I speak in Chinese or in Tibetan, instantly my gestures, my lip movements, and even the tone of my voice all remain my own. Yet at the very same time, my language itself is completely transformed, taking on the form and character of another nation. So, just by myself alone in the current market right now, indeed, I can use the languages of more than 70 countries. Moreover, the gestures and cultural patterns, including those of the local people, for example, whether it's the British, Koreans, or Japanese, when they see it, it's just like someone from their own country is really speaking to them. In the past, this was how we operated, but if many people had to do it, it was very difficult. So what will it actually look like in the near future? Next, let's take a quick look, maybe just a minute or two. The other day, they made this and sent me a little bit of it.
At that time, I was very young, carrying a backpack every day, following behind the Dharma King. So I wasn't particularly clear about everything. But now, actually hearing directly from them for the first time, many people truly have faith in Tibetan Buddhism, for example.
우리의 유일한 목적은 무엇일까요? 왜냐하면 이러한 불교의 진리가 우리 주변 사람들에게 알려지면 그들은 배웠고 이해했습니다.
Вся буддийская община проявляет интерес к слушанию, размышлению и практике. Это, безусловно, хорошо, но все же есть очень много важных моментов из-за нашей глупости, из-за нашей жадности, из-за некоторых наших очень дурных и вредных привычек мы целыми днями испытываем разные страдания и беспокойства.
しかし、どのような状況であっても、私たちチベット仏教の中では素晴らしい方々がパドマサンババの見口々の舵を受けており、その後、仏法を広めて終生を利益し、非常に大きな力を持っています。このような偉大な徳の高い方々も絶えず現れ続けています。
Genauso denke ich persönlich, wenn wir als Buddhisten wirklich lernen möchten, zum Beispiel wenn wir 10 Jahre lang lernen oder 5 oder 6 Jahre lernen, ist das vergleichbar mit diesem Tier, das es an einen anderen Ort zieht. Plus important encore, c'est véritablement l'avenir du bouddhisme. Que ce soit les grands maîtres ou chaque laïc qui vient tout juste de se convertir au bouddhisme, nous avons tous une certaine responsabilité.
তারা সত্যিকারের আন্তরিকভাবে সকলের উপকার চায় না, শুধু নিজের প্রশংসা করলে সেটার কোনো মূল্য বা গুরুত্ব থাকে না, কারণ অন্য কেউ যদি স্বীকৃতি না দেয় তাহলে সেই প্রশংসার কোনো মানে হয় না ในเรื่องนี้ข้าพเจ้าคิดว่าทุกท่านที่อยู่ที่นี่ผู้ที่เคยฟังคัมภีร์เข้าสู่การปฏิบัติก็น่าจะเข้าใจจิตโพธิในส่วนนี้สำหรับตัวข้าพเจ้าเองก็รู้สึกยินดีอย่างแท้จริงในใจ
They did some, for example, entering the Bodhisattva's way, some of which were made in other languages, and when sent to them, many of them could understand it. So in the foreseeable future, many aspects and developments will indeed present certain significant challenges and obstacles as well. What I mean to convey is that in the times to come, this is something profoundly related to the language. And also, as I previously mentioned the other day, they are also diligently working on developing advanced models for intelligent and autonomous robots. They took a few detailed photos of me, and everything around me was meticulously being recorded for this comprehensive video. This entire video is currently being processed by a sophisticated program on the computer, analyzing and refining the footage. And the AI keeps continuously consuming and being fed data without interruption. So in the near future, I could truly become a fully functional robot, one that is exactly like me. Whether I sing or become some kind of movie actor, I could do anything completely as myself. All I simply need to do is let it record me for a little moment. This is in terms of language. It didn't take a very long time at all, as I just did a little bit of work and tried out some new and interesting things this spring season. I truly believe, including the comprehensive subtitles positioned directly below, like in Korean, Japanese, and French, among other languages. Languages from more than 70 countries anyway. Now all of them can be fully displayed below. And as for the computational model itself, I didn't perform any modifications or adjustments at all, but once my specific model is successfully located and identified, I can also become a movie actor. My language, anything about me, can be completely and utterly transformed in such a profound and significant way. So in this current era now, there really are certain substantial and significant challenges that we are facing, or indeed, we do confront some of these very real and pressing issues. This is truly something worth reflecting upon. What I mean is that even for us living right now, Confucius explained that in every generation, and even when looking toward the future, such principles can still be applied in this very way. It's a method to make predictions. But as for the foreseeable future of all humanity, what lies ahead? What will it become? Sometimes it truly seems these things are indeed hard to say. That's one aspect. The second important aspect, some things from the distant past can also be speculated upon and considered in the ongoing process of speculating. Now it's like this isn't something foreign. There are many such theories abroad, including in Guanghan, Sichuan, China. There's a truly remarkable place called Sanxingdui. They also have their very own impressive museum, and here many ancient and extraordinary things have been discovered. We often say human civilization is 5,000 years old, or however many years it is, including the idea that people nowadays were originally a particularly unintelligent species and then gradually evolved over time into modern human beings. But there are also some other perspectives and theories to consider. Now, speculating back to the truly ancient times, generally speaking, as we have just mentioned, the figures of Yao, Shun, and Yu are widely considered to be among the very earliest and most foundational figures in recorded history. From so many years before the Common Era, but above and beyond that, many of the unearthed artifacts we have now. Now, what are they excavating at Sanxingdui? What exactly are they unearthing? What they are unearthing is all kinds of various utensils and essential tools commonly used by people. As for these utensils, compared to what is actually written in many of our modern history books and historical textbooks, what is recorded in those texts have been completely overturned by these discoveries. Many things can no longer be easily maintained or effectively continued as they were before, because this archaeological team, what kinds of things have they excavated in many places? They found valuable things like magnificent elephant's ivory or some intricately crafted bronze and precious gold items, which have been crafted into all kinds of animal shapes. Some of the human tools are actually quite astonishing and truly remarkable as well. So allow me to show you all just a little bit more about many of these fascinating things right now, logically speaking and from a practical standpoint. For example, some ancient coffins nowadays, if you carefully open them up, they are often found to be approximately 2 or even 3,000 years old. However, many of these valuable artifacts date back to over 2,000 years before the Common Era. Their masks, for example, are made of extremely thin gold, and there are also other similar items like that. And as we mentioned earlier, it is worth noting the Yue and Ni on the chariots that Confucius talked about were made in this way, and they were made of bronze. According to what history tells us now, this kind of technology simply didn't exist during the spring and autumn period. But some of the technologies found here completely surpass the technologies they had back then, and this is also one of their masks from that time. Moreover, the physical appearance of these ancient humans is completely and utterly different from some of ours today. This is quite similar to what we've consistently found in many different places, where there are also similarities. And then there are these kinds of excavated items. These significant discoveries have now completely overturned many established things, including some of the common everyday tools that we currently use now. So perhaps in the near future, when it is more convenient for you, you can also go and take a closer look. After visiting this place, you will truly feel that we as humans still have so much that is worth deep reflection. Although in today's contemporary history books and academic records, they say that since a certain year AD, human civilization started from that time. But now many research teams and such dare not dig any deeper. If they continue to dig deeper, they will face significant challenges. Our courses, our entire history, and many of our fundamental textbooks would have to be rewritten. So when it comes to some very important things, maybe some of us here have read books, those who have studied. I think that we can simply use some of our current cultural concepts to explain things. But in fact, in various scriptures and treatises, the Buddha spoke of tens of thousands, even thousands of years, and even countless kalpas. These various explanations are actually very reasonable. And as for these archaeological finds, when indeed truly necessary, these significant discoveries can also be studied in detail. Actually, there are many analysts in this field, and the meaning behind their analyses is somewhat different from what we usually think. That's all I can say about this point. Some aspects are not quite the same. So everyone should broaden their perspective and take a closer look. Within, there are actually some things referred to as prehistoric civilizations, you could say. And among the many diverse civilizations that have existed, these particular prehistoric ones are actually quite distinctly different. In these fascinating areas, I think it's absolutely necessary to delve much deeper and explore further. Now we move on to the very last chapter, where Confucius says, to offer sacrifices to spirits that are not one's own ancestors is nothing other than a form of flattery and is considered improper conduct. To see what is right and not do it is lack of courage. Here Confucius continues speaking. What does he continue to say? To offer sacrifices to spirits that are not one's own. In fact, what is being said here is that if the spirits are not your own ancestors or deities, then you still go to offer sacrifices to them. That is a form of sycophancy. As for the spirits mentioned here, in the culture of the Han people in ancient times, when a person died, they would become like after a person passed away. Because nowadays, during the Qingming festival, people burn paper offerings. It seems as if people truly turn into spirits after their physical death. Here, spirits specifically refers to one's own revered ancestors. The extended meaning here is that it refers to ancestors. If they are not your own ancestors, and you go to offer sacrifices or make offerings to them, that is flattery, which is very inappropriate. If they are not your ancestors to begin with, for example, my ancestors, are those from my own direct lineage, but if I try to curry favor with others and then go to my superior and seek their approval and say, I want to participate in your ancestral rites, I will go and take part in it and be a part of it, just to please him, to make him happy. If you do it this way, this is a form of flattery. And it's a very cunning and indeed deceptive practice. That's the first and primary meaning. The second meaning is not acting when you see what is right. You can clearly see something that absolutely should be done, and it is quite evident. You see something that truly ought to be done. But if you don't actively do it, just standing idly by, you do think that is a good thing to do, but you don't do it. You just leave it there, effectively pushing the responsibility onto others. Such individuals are often called cowardly, truly powerless to act, genuine cowards, people who are especially and profoundly incapable. On the surface, it seems like you shouldn't participate in other people's ancestral rites, and when you see something that needs to be done, you should do it. Otherwise, you become a coward. It might initially seem a bit simple, almost deceptively so, but in actual reality, this particular situation is not so simple at all. This already deeply touches upon a significant matter of fundamental morality. We often talk about thieves of morality, do we not? If you don't do what you're supposed to do properly, and you do things you shouldn't do, such a person is unusually obsequious and arrogantly flattering. For example, when we encounter someone showing great deference to a leader, we clearly see this attitude on display. You shouldn't be trying to curry favor with them, but in order to please them, you keep following them around. In today's contemporary terms, always flattering them, constantly praising them, constantly saying nice things in front of them. This is not something that you were ever truly supposed to undertake or engage in. But if you proceed to go ahead and do it anyway, it is indeed an unreasonable and illogical course of action to pursue. This is a very sycophantic and overly obsequious act, constantly trying to ingratiate yourself with him, or you may often notice this person showing excessive affection toward him, serving him with eagerness and pretending devotion. We commonly describe such behavior as flattery, or in other words, what we traditionally call obsequiousness. In order to achieve some personal purpose, one tries to please him with flattery, but such behavior is hypocritical and empty of real value, for if you neglect the very duty you are supposed to perform, then it becomes meaningless, and instead go and do something else entirely. Or if you simply stand by and just watch, then nothing will change. That's also a sign of incompetence and a sign of weakness as well. Nowadays, aren't there some companies that do charity work, but the owners themselves are unwilling to contribute even a little, letting other people do it, or at that particular time, pretending that they are not involved in this area at all. This kind of behavior is actually quite unreasonable, so what has already been pointed out here is something that we should really think about carefully and consider. No matter what it is, if it is meaningful, you should do it. This is something we've talked about before as well. For example, in Tibetan areas, sometimes when people see something happen, like a car accident or when someone else is in trouble, many people don't care about anything else. They immediately go to help, immediately take action, and this is a very meaningful thing to do. This is precisely what a real person should genuinely do. We have a saying called acting bravely for a just cause. When you see something happen, you should step up and do it. This is very important. If you don't do this, only trying to please others, you might find yourself in a difficult situation, just going along with what others do. This means that people should always be truly genuine. If you do what you're supposed to do and don't do what you shouldn't, but instead, in order to achieve various important goals, you must act with integrity and purpose. You just keep following others, then that's unnecessary. So now, in this world, just to make our leaders happy and to gain achievements, status, or wealth for ourselves, we sometimes deliberately pretend or put on a show, acting in ways that are not truly genuine, only for recognition and benefits, to be especially respectful and nice to them. But this kind of behavior is actually the deceptive behavior of a cunning person. So as people, it is important to recognize this. We should always be truly honest, sincere, and consistent both inside and out. We shouldn't act one way in front of others and another way behind their backs. Thinking one thing in your heart, but saying something entirely different out loud. Such individuals are often called cunning and deceptive. People in ancient times, truly, were very consistent both inside and out. They didn't pretend to be happy on the outside when they were actually quite unhappy in front of you. In their hearts, they were truly themselves. They actually really disliked and deeply resented that particular person. Such individuals are in fact not truly good people. So, as for genuinely good people, they should conscientiously do what they are inherently supposed to do, fulfilling their responsibilities, and absolutely not do what they shouldn't do. If something is is meaningful and others advise you to do it, you should also do it yourself. If something is meaningless, there's no need to do it. But if something is clearly meaningful and you keep avoiding it, that's not quite very reasonable. So nowadays, some of us, including some staff members, and in some particular cases, are actually especially prone to passing the buck, so to speak, when it comes to their own personal responsibilities and the duties they are expected to fulfill. They immediately push them onto others. Today there was something I asked them to do, something the people in charge should have done themselves. But when I asked them to do it, they sent me a WeChat message telling me to contact this person. I didn't really think too much of it at all, to be honest. So I went and contacted that person, and then that person sent me a WeChat contact for someone else, telling me to get in touch with that person instead. So I messaged that person on WeChat, but actually they could have just contacted each other. Then that person did the same thing and sent me a WeChat message saying I should contact another person. At that point I thought, wow, this is kind of similar to what Confucius talked about. Nowadays, a lot of people think that sometimes we just don't know what to do, but that's not really the case. Sometimes when people have things they should be doing, especially those of us who are supposed to get things done when the time comes, if we haven't gained enough experience from handling things and effectively shifting it onto others, or perhaps they've already grown accustomed to being quite clever about it and have developed a certain knack for it, whether it's in the way they talk or the way they do things. On the surface, it all seems very pleasant, but in reality, it's just passing the buck back and forth. They don't want to get involved themselves, because if they do get involved, even though it might be meaningful, it could also be a bit tiring. So they just don't want to be part of it. That's why sometimes people nowadays, maybe because they're always looking at all kinds of short messages or watching too many short videos, they've become quite experienced and highly skilled in this particular area. So, in Confucius's eyes, people should still genuinely strive to be authentic. Do not try to merely appear to be something you are not, smarter than others in front of them. In reality, you're just fooling yourself. There's really no need for that. So whatever you do, it's best to be open and above board. Didn't we say the other day, a gentleman is open and at ease, while a petty person is always anxious and worried. A gentleman is accommodating but not cliquish, while a petty person is cliquish but not accommodating. Didn't we already talk about this before? Nowadays, a lot of people tend to be quite adept at the petty tricks of small-minded people. As for whether they possess the true wisdom of a gentleman, that's still uncertain and worth observing further. Now, moving on to the next section, the third chapter. The third chapter is called Ba Yi Pian, the chapter of 8 rows. As for Ba Yi Pian here, Yi refers to a group or collective. Actually, Ba Yi means there are 8 groups, or indeed 8 formations. In Tibetan, it is translated as Jian Chang, but as for Chang, I am not entirely sure, but I do suppose that is acceptable. In fact, it fundamentally refers to the systematic arrangement or the purposeful grouping of individuals. For example, consider how many distinct teams we have formed, or how many people are meticulously gathered together for a specific purpose. This is important because in the presence of the king, they would frequently perform, play their music, and gracefully dance. At that particular time, depending on their distinct and varying rules, some groups would have 8 organized rows, while others would consistently have 6 well-arranged rows. Some would have 4 rows, and some would have 2 rows. As for 8 distinct rows, each and every row consistently consists of exactly 8 individual people. So in this particular case, 8 rows actually means 64 people. So here it's a performance by 64 people, a show involving 64 people. That's what it means. So next it says, Confucius, the wise and venerable sage, said to Jisha, 8 full rows of dancers performed in the grand courtyard. If this truly egregious act can be tolerated, then what else indeed cannot be tolerated? The meaning here is quite straightforward. This is what Confucius said about Jishi, a man who was known for his immense wealth and great fortune. Jishi was someone with significant financial power and influence in society. Sometimes his power even surpassed that of the ruler. He was very formidable. Confucius spoke to him precisely because this particular individual was not especially wise at all. He himself was originally a wealthy and noble man. According to the ancient hierarchy for people of wealth and status, first came the Son of Heaven, then the feudal lords and their respective vassals, then the great and wealthy individuals, and then the commoners. That was the order. This is something we discussed a few years ago when we talked about the beginning of Confucius's Analects. It seems we also mentioned it in the classic of filial piety, or in some other text as well. So in this case, generally speaking, if the Son of Heaven appeared and a musical performance was held in his esteemed presence, there would certainly need to be 8 rows with a full 64 people participating in the grand display to begin performing for him to start dancing. 8 rows were for when the Son of Heaven arrived, which is equivalent to the arrival of a national leader. 64 people would be absolutely required to perform the elaborate Vajra dance for him. Just joking. If it was a powerful feudal lord, which is essentially like a provincial governor, if the esteemed provincial governor or the influential provincial party secretary were to arrive, then it would indeed be 6 rows with 48 people quite possibly dancing. Just now we mentioned the feudal lords, and then there are the great nobles. These great nobles would generally have 4 rows comprising 32 people. If it was a commoner, the number of individuals involved might typically be around 12 or even 16 people. This is because they had varying levels of social standing. For example, nowadays in many places across the country, when we receive some leaders, this is the first method of reception. Including their comprehensive security measures and stringent standards, they are all meticulously divided into first, second, and third levels. So for this particular person, actually he was neither the Son of Heaven nor a feudal lord, but he often used the 8 rows, with 64 people dancing and playing music for him. So his behavior was a bit excessive, and it went beyond what was considered appropriate at that time, showing that he really overdid things for his own enjoyment. He wasn't actually a king, but he used the king's way of receiving guests. For example, when some of us go out, maybe the Khenpo or Khenmo have their own standards, but a counselor has the standards of a counselor. And then if someone is not anything at all, but demands, I'm from the Buddhist academy, and says, you should give me the highest Khenpo from the academy, or give me the reception reserved for a Dharma king, then in that particular case his standards are a little bit over the top. For example, I am certainly not a Dharma king, but I say, I am a Dharma king. However you treat a Dharma king, treat me the same way. Give me that kind of treatment. It's the same with many leaders. If someone is just a small village leader, for example, but he consistently uses the elevated standards of a national leader for himself, that's quite excessive indeed. But this person insists on doing so. So when you use the 8 rows of dancers with 64 people performing music, playing music and dancing joyfully and freely in front of everyone like this, if you can truly tolerate this, then there's absolutely nothing else that cannot be tolerated. What else could possibly be intolerable? If you don't even truly understand the most basic and fundamental method, how could you possibly tolerate it? Honestly, I often think nowadays, I must say, when I see those stories about Confucius, to put it in more modern and contemporary terms, some things really are quite unexpected and surprisingly so. For example, in our world, there are still such situations nowadays. Ordinary people, when 2 individuals get married at the wedding ceremony, usually even an inexpensive car at home. They don't even have that. But on that particular day, just to truly show off to absolutely everyone, they'll have a dozen magnificent desert princes, a dozen powerful off-road vehicles, and even luxurious Rolls Royces and other such extravagant things like that. But their own family doesn't actually have any of these things. Such a grand display in front of others is completely out of line with their actual status. Everyone has their own status, whether it's wealth, position, or the way they host others. This kind of phenomenon, if it's someone foolish, they don't even truly realize it themselves. They genuinely think this is precisely how it should be for them. And the more extravagant, the better. But in reality, that's not the case. Such individuals are very ambitious. When people possess propriety, they are at peace. Without it, they are truly in danger. This is precisely what was stated in the past in the first half of Book of Rites Chuli. Mipham Rinpoche also said that poor people who like to dress up and rich people who wear shabby clothes, these 2 types of people, in the eyes of the world, are often perceived, are truly laughable. In the advice to kings, it is said, for example, if I am especially poor, but I consistently act extremely wealthy in front of others and present myself as such and maintain that image, people will secretly laugh at me too. Or if I am truly blessed with wealth, but I wear tattered clothes, not like some corrupt people who have embezzled hundreds of millions, but wear shabby clothes in front of others. and ride a broken bicycle, if that's the case. In reality, it is truly and utterly, completely inappropriate. So when a person does things, they should always fully match their identity, both inside and out, in every aspect. This includes even such matters as this. It may seem very simple, but in the future we should match our identity accordingly. For example, when you dress, if you are a monastic, you should properly wear the traditional robes of a monastic. Otherwise, if you wear a suit and tie and such, that would be quite inappropriate. You might think it looks great and feel pretty good about it yourself as well, and truly and completely. But if you're clearly a lay person and you shave your head, nowadays, aren't there a lot of tourists here who, when they get to the mandala, put on a red shawl and do all sorts of things like wrapping up their hair? If it's just for an artistic performance, that's another matter. But in reality, you're not qualified. When not qualified, you might find it funny yourself, but others will think, oh, you're just not really... On one hand, you are disrupting other people's systems and established rules, and at the same time, you really do come across as quite clueless and rather thoughtless, which is really quite inappropriate. It's not just us, but also many other diverse groups in today's society as well. One time I saw a situation like this in a village where the buildings were carefully constructed in such a distinctive way that as soon as you visually perceive them, you immediately know and recognize that this is undoubtedly something truly authentic from a village. They built it to look exactly like this, and everyone always laughs at it. It's like our very own quaint village, or perhaps a small commune, or even that particular township. And there's another one. They built it to look like the White House. This one is a district, and a lot of people laugh at it, but they themselves think this is something great. Whether it's collective or private, sometimes things totally don't match who we are at all. People are like this. The way we dress, the way we act, many of our behaviors and choices are often not truly in line with our real selves. It might look funny to others, but in reality they might not have any real meaning, because the profound meaning embedded within their architecture, the high standards that guide its creation, and the significant values that it truly represents, is just like what we ourselves essentially are, and everyone is fully aware of this fact. So if we're not careful, people really, someone who isn't actually an emperor, just an ordinary wealthy person, or even just a regular commoner, but once you have money, it's as if you are truly being received like a magnificent and revered king. Especially since we often see on various digital platforms people from all kinds of diverse ethnic groups and backgrounds. When they get married, there's certainly a certain level of extravagance, and sometimes it truly seems a bit over the top, doesn't it? Whether that's good or bad for themselves is hard to say. Whether it's about clothing, nowadays a lot of people, some individuals might just really like it for themselves personally, and some elderly people. They have all sorts of valuable things, including precious coral, beautiful agate, gleaming gold, and shimmering silver, all meticulously crafted into especially heavy and substantial pieces. You can see they're already quite old and unusually thin, but they still wear these very heavy gold and silver ornaments, all kinds of jewelry, really everything imaginable. But maybe it's just their personal preference. And perhaps it doesn't really do any harm to society. And some people, when it comes to clothing, or the way they decorate and accessorize themselves, or even the places they live, all of these basically match their own status, fit their own financial means, and are in line with their own traditions and habits. These particular things are very important. Otherwise, if you act excessively, you could face consequences. Confucius would not approve. Because no one knows where Confucius is now. He himself said he was like a spirit or a deity. So if that's the case, maybe he feels a bit uncomfortable with it. So from our own perspective, there are some roles or identities that really don't seem quite reasonable, and sometimes they may appear a bit out of place or hard for us to accept. This is something that truly deserves our careful attention. All right then, that's all for today's discussion.
Bandara Banma Sadar